The notification popped up on my phone while I was in the middle of a crucial meeting with the board of directors. Another withdrawal from our joint account, $50,000 this time. My hand trembled slightly as I silenced my phone, but I kept my expression neutral as I continued my presentation. Inside, my mind was racing. In the past 3 months, Mark had drained nearly $300,000 from our savings, and I knew exactly where it was going. My name is Sarah Chin, and at 35, I'm the youngest chief financial officer at Morgan & Stanley Investment Group. I spent 15 years building my career from the ground up, working endless hours and sacrificing everything to get where I am. Mark, my husband of 8 years, used to say he admired my drive. That was before Jessica started working as his personal trainer at his exclusive gym. The signs had been there for months: the late nights at the gym, the new wardrobe, the sudden interest in his appearance. But I wasn't as naive as he thought. Being a CFO meant I knew how to follow money trails, and Mark's trail led straight to luxury hotel charges, expensive jewelry purchases, and first-class flights to exotic locations, all with the woman who was supposed to be helping him get in shape. I sat through the rest of the board meeting, my presentation flawless despite the chaos in my mind. When it finally ended, I retreated to my office and pulled up our bank statements. The latest withdrawal had nearly emptied our joint account. Mark clearly thought he was being clever, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. "Sarah?" My assistant Rebecca poked her head in. "Your husband's on line 1. Says it's urgent." I took a deep breath, steadying myself before picking up the phone. "Mark?" "Hey babe," his voice dripped with false cheerfulness. "Listen, I need to talk to you about something important. Can you come home early today?" I glanced at the bank statement still open on my screen. "Of course, I'll be there in an hour." When I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Mark's new Mercedes parked out front, another recent purchase he'd made without consulting me. Our 3-story Victorian home, which we'd bought together 5 years ago, suddenly felt cold and unwelcoming. Mark was waiting in the living room, lounging on our Italian leather sofa with an arrogance that made my blood boil. "Sarah," he said, not bothering to get up, "we need to talk." "About the $300,000 you spent in the last 3 months?" I asked calmly, setting my briefcase down. His eyes narrowed slightly, but his smirk remained. "Actually, yes, among other things." He stood up, straightening his designer shirt. "I've met someone who appreciates me, who makes time for me. Unlike you, she's not obsessed with her career." I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat. "You mean Jessica? Your personal trainer?" For a moment, his confidence wavered. "How did you?" "I'm a CFO, Mark. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the hotel charges, the jewelry, the flights to Bali?" He recovered quickly, his smirk returning. "Well, then this makes things easier. I want a divorce. And since I've already moved most of our savings, you might want to think carefully about how difficult you want to make this." I maintained my composure, years of boardroom negotiations serving me well. "You really shouldn't have done that, Mark." "Why?" he scoffed. "Because you'll be mad. Because you'll try to take me to court. Good luck proving anything. I've covered my tracks." I smiled then, a small, knowing smile that made his smirk falter. "No, you should have done that because that money, it's not really gone, and you've just committed a felony." The color drained from his face as I pulled out my phone and began playing a recording, his voice clearly discussing his plans to hide assets with Jessica. "You see, Mark, I've been tracking everything. Every withdrawal, every purchase, every conversation. And there's something else you should know." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "That joint account you've been draining? It's not actually our money. It's company money I was managing for a special investment project. You've just stolen $300,000 from Morgan & Stanley Investment Group." His face went completely white. "You're lying," he whispered, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "Am I?" I asked, laying out the paperwork. "Would you like to explain that to the FBI? Because they're very interested in talking to you about wire fraud." Mark collapsed onto the sofa, his arrogance finally cracking. "You set me up," he said, his voice hoarse. "No, Mark, you set yourself up. I just made sure there would be consequences." The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and revelations. I contacted my lawyer, Sarah Martinez, who had been briefed on the situation months ago. She arrived within the hour, armed with more documentation than Mark could comprehend. Mrs. Chen has been gathering evidence for months, Sarah explained, laying out file after file. We have records of every transaction, every conversation, and every meeting between you and Jessica Thompson, including some very interesting wire transfers to offshore accounts. Mark's face grew paler with each document. This is insane, he muttered. You can't prove anything. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Actually, we can. You see, when you're married to someone who specializes in financial fraud detection, you might want to be more careful about your paper trail. I watched as my husband, the man who thought he could outsmart me, began to crumble. The facade of the confident manipulator was falling away, revealing the desperate man beneath. The FBI will be here tomorrow morning, I said calmly. They're particularly interested in those offshore accounts you set up. Did Jessica help you with those, or was that your own brilliant idea? He looked up sharply. Leave her out of this. I'm afraid that's not possible, Sarah interjected. Ms. Thompson is already being questioned. It seems she has quite a history of similar situations with wealthy married men. That hit him like a physical blow. What do you mean? I pulled out another file. Jessica Thompson isn't even her real name. It's Jennifer Williams, and she's been involved in 3 other cases of fraud and extortion. You're not her first Mark. Just her latest victim. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so tragic. Mark had thrown away our marriage for a woman who had been playing him from the start. What do you want? He finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I want every penny back, I said firmly. Not just in our joint account, but everything you spent on her. The hotels, the jewelry, the trips. All of it. And if I can't, then you'll face federal charges for wire fraud and embezzlement. The choice is yours. That night, after Mark had left to think things over, I sat in our home office, staring at the photographs on the wall. 8 years of marriage reduced to evidence files and legal documents. My phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca, my assistant. The team is ready whenever you are. Just say the word. I smiled slightly. What Mark didn't know was that this was just the beginning. While he'd been busy with Jessica, I'd been preparing for something much bigger. The money he'd stolen wasn't just any company funds. It was bait, carefully placed to expose a larger scheme of corruption within our investment firm. Mark's greed had played right into my hands, giving me the evidence I needed to uncover a network of fraud that went far beyond our marital problems. Tomorrow, when the FBI arrived, they wouldn't just be investigating my husband's theft. They'd be uncovering one of the biggest financial scandals in the company's history. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from Jessica, or Jennifer, rather. She wanted to make a deal. I have information, she wrote. About Mark, about the company, about everything. Let me help you, and I'll tell you what I know. I leaned back in my chair, considering her offer. Jennifer Williams might be a con artist, but she was also clever. She knew which way the wind was blowing, and she was smart enough to jump ship before it sank. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The FBI would be arriving at 9, but I had preparations to make. As I walked through the quiet halls of Morgan & Stanley, I thought about how different things would look by the end of the day. My office phone rang. It was Mark. I'll tell you everything, he said without preamble. About the money, about Jessica, about what's really going on at the company. I'm listening, I replied, opening my laptop to record the conversation. What followed was a confession that would shake our firm to its foundations. Mark hadn't just been stealing our savings. He'd been part of a sophisticated embezzlement scheme orchestrated by some of the highest-ranking executives in the company. They approached me 6 months ago, he explained. Said they knew about my affair with Jessica, about the money I was spending. They offered to help me hide it if I helped them move certain funds around. I kept him talking, recording every detail. By the time he finished, I had enough information to bring down half the executive board. At precisely 9 o'clock, FBI agents entered the building. But they didn't stop at the security desk. Instead, they headed straight for the executive floor. I watched from my office window as FBI agents led our CEO and 3 board members out of the building in handcuffs. The scandal was bigger than anyone had imagined. $50 million in embezzled funds, dozens of fake accounts, and a trail of corruption that spanned 5 years. Mark's involvement had been the key to unlocking everything. His clumsy attempts to hide our savings had exposed a sophisticated money laundering operation that the FBI had been trying to crack for months. My careful documentation and strategic placement of funds had provided the evidence they needed. Jennifer Williams, as it turned out, was more than just a con artist. She was an informant working with the SEC, using her position as a personal trainer to gather information on wealthy clients involved in financial crimes. When she realized I was building a case, she'd reach out to collaborate. "Your husband wasn't the target," she explained during our meeting with the FBI. "He was just the weak link we needed to expose the larger operation. When I saw the transfers he was making, I knew he was involved with something bigger." The fallout was spectacular. Morgan & Stanley's stock plummeted as news of the scandal broke. Clients panicked, investors fled, and the media descended like vultures. But I was ready for that too. "Ms. Chen," a reporter called out as I left the building that evening, "did you know about the corruption when you took the CFO position?" I stopped, facing the crowd of cameras. "I took this position because I believed in cleaning up Wall Street. Today, we've taken a significant step toward that goal." Back home, I found Mark waiting on the doorstep. He looked broken, nothing like the arrogant man who'd smirked at me just days before. "I'll sign whatever you want," he said quietly. "The divorce papers, the confession, everything. Just tell me one thing. Did you know? When we got married, did you know this would happen?" I studied him for a moment. "No, Mark. When we got married, I believed in us. But when you started stealing from me, you gave me the opportunity to expose something much bigger than our failed marriage." He nodded slowly. "They're offering me a deal. If I testify against everyone involved." "Take it," I advised. "It's better than federal prison." After you left, I sat in our empty house, looking at the life we'd built together. 8 years of memories, both good and bad, all leading to this moment. My phone buzzed with a message from the FBI. They wanted me to testify before a grand jury next week. The investigation would take months, maybe years. The corruption ran deep, touching banks and investment firms across the country. But I was prepared for that. My team had been gathering evidence for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. As I packed up Mark's things, I found an old photograph from our wedding day. We looked so happy, so full of hope for the future. I tucked it away in a box with other memories of a life I no longer recognized. 6 months later, I stood in court watching Mark testify against his former conspirators. The evidence was damning, detailed records of every transaction, every meeting, every phone call. The executives who had thought themselves untouchable were facing decades in prison. Jennifer Williams testified too, revealing how she'd worked with the SEC to build cases against corrupt financiers. Her testimony, combined with Mark's confession and my documentation, created an airtight case. The aftermath transformed Wall Street. New regulations were passed, oversight was increased, and a message was sent. No one was above the law. Morgan & Stanley underwent a complete restructuring, with me leading the effort to rebuild the company's reputation. Mark took his plea deal and served 2 years in a minimum security prison. The last time I saw him, he was being led away in handcuffs, looking back at me with a mixture of regret and admiration. "You really are brilliant," he said softly. I should have seen that instead of resenting it. I signed the divorce papers the day his sentence began. The house was sold, our assets divided, what was left of them, and our life together became nothing more than evidence in a historical case file. Years later, I received a letter from Mark, postmarked from Seattle where he'd moved after his release. "I understand now," he wrote, "what you did wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about changing a broken system. I'm sorry I couldn't be the partner you deserved in that fight." I didn't reply. Some chapters are better left closed. Today, I run my own financial security consulting firm, helping companies identify and prevent fraud. The Morgan & Stanley case is studied in business schools as an example of how one person's determination can expose systemic corruption. Sometimes, when I'm teaching seminars about financial fraud detection, someone asks if I regret how everything unfolded. I think about Mark, about the life we might have had if he'd made different choices. But then I remember the changes we helped create, the reforms that protect thousands of investors, and I know it was worth it. The lesson wasn't just about money or betrayal. It was about standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. Sometimes the biggest victories come from our greatest losses. Mark taught me that. Not by being a good husband, but by being the perfect example of how greed and arrogance can blind people to their own destruction. His attempt to steal our savings didn't just end our marriage, it helped me expose corruption that had stolen from thousands of people. In the end, that was worth more than any amount he could have taken from our account.